Greetings, programs. Pyrrh Pianissimo here, and welcome to Vintage Story. Today we're going to take a look at world settings and discuss how I think you may be best served by setting these if you are a new player. So in order to start a new world, you would click over into the box under single player and bottom right, create new world. Now up at world name, you can hit the little dice and it will go through some fun little names. I think this is really a great addition. I mean, this is just adorable, really. Now there are some presets here. Obviously creative, you've got the creative menu with all of the blocks, and it does automatically give you a flat terrain. Wilderness survival, this is comparable to hardcore. It is fairly grindy and very scary, and there is a lot of combat involved. Then of course you have exploration. This is a little less combat and survival and more about exploring and doing the building. This is better for a beginner, but if you look closely at the settings, it's still quite a bit grindy, and I don't think really prepares you for the real vanilla experience of playing Vintage Story. Now, if we start with standard, this is balanced in between, the hardcore survival mode where you can't see what's going on and the exploration where it's almost perfectly safe. It still represents a bit of a grindy play and not as enjoyable as I think the standard game can be. So we're going to click on standard to start, and then we're going to click on customize. Now, if you do have a seed, you can put that here. The next video will go over selecting a world seed that will best serve a beginning player or someone that's really wanting to enjoy a well-rounded Vintage Story experience. For now, we're going to leave the game mode survival. Starting climate is temperate, and honestly, if you take a look at this, I don't believe temperate is actually temperate. I really think it needs to be somewhere in between temperate and warm, because temperate will give you fairly severe winters even on the standard season setting. I think if you're starting in a new world and you don't want to be hard pressed to make sure that you have a ton of food put away for winter, I would start in the warm climate. But really, I think you can do either one depending on your other settings. So really, if you're going to do a beginning world, this is up to you. I prefer warm. It just seems a little more fun that way, and I can go find the snow later on. If you really like snow and you want it snowing in the middle of fall, then yes, choose temperate. We're going to choose warm. Random respawn radius. Now your spawn point will be random according to this number. I prefer having a set spawn point, and look, you can go all the way up to, can you imagine spawning 10,000 blocks away? It would take forever to get home naked, and no, thank you. And if you're concerned about getting killed at your spawn point over and over, set it to a little farther away. So I prefer having it closer in, but maybe not right on top of the spawn point, just in case you get killed right there. Grace timer. This is when your drifters will start to spawn. This does not count wolves and bears, which will still try to eat you. All right. I think as a new player, you should be setting this as 10 days before monsters appear. This gives you some time to see if you can manage to dodge the wolves and bears, get enough food, build a shelter before drifters start appearing at night, and possibly during the day with rifts, which we'll discuss in another video. Death punishment. Now the standard is to drop your inventory contents wherever you die, and then you have to go back naked and then find wherever your stuff dropped. And of course it's in lava, it's too bad. And if you're far enough away from home, it will despawn, and then again, you're out the work. I think if you're playing for enjoyment, that you can either keep inventory contents or we'll discuss mods. My preferred way is somewhere in between, where it drops my stuff where I died, but it leaves it in a gravestone, so I know it'll be there once I can prepare and possibly get help and go back and get my things. So for now, I'm going to keep inventory contents, and we'll discuss mods in another video. Again, I think for your maximum enjoyment, you can do either one. I think if you're just learning the game, you may want to keep inventory contents and play for a few days at least until monsters appear, see how you like it, and before you start trying to go back and get your stuff. Seasons enabled. The seasons are beautiful in Vintage Story. We're going to leave that the way it is. Player lives infinite. That means you can die as many times as you want and the game will not end. Days per month. It starts here at 9 days. I prefer to lengthen the month to 30 days. That's 24 real life hours. The game does stop when you quit unless you're playing multiplayer, and then it runs, of course, 24 hours. But if you're just starting in your single player, I think this is a matter of personal preference. So it doesn't really affect your gameplay, except if you're picking a temperate climate. This can lengthen the game time you have in order to stockpile your food for the winter. True winters, I'm perfectly fine with the winters. It's enabled. True winters means that the cold temperatures damage crops, they reduce animal spawn during the winter time, and they reduce the meat harvested from animals. So if you want an even easier game, you can disable this. Block gravity, sand and gravel. Block gravity in Minecraft, if you bust sand and gravel, they do fall straight down. However, in Vintage Story, they will fall down and then kind of roll downhill. So it's best to start with sand and gravel. If you want a really hard game, you can switch to soil as well. I think it's easier to get used to the idea with just sand and gravel. Allow underground farming. I like to turn this on. If you have this off as default, you suffer penalties the farther below sea level you go until you get no light at all to farm your crops. Body temperature hardiness, I'll just leave this at 0. This determines how cold it gets before your character starts to freeze to death. Creature hostility aggressive, I think that needs to be left alone because you're experiencing, how the mobs actually work. Creature strength, I leave that at 100%. Player health points, I leave that at 15. Hunger rate normal, walk speed normal. I like to actually increase this. I think the only reason to slow walk speed is to increase the grind. So I just leave it at fast. Food spoilage rate. I can just leave this at normal or 100%. That is the rate that your food will spoil, and it is affected by different temperatures as well as the way you store it. So I just leave this at 100. Tree sapling growth time. I'm not really certain why they've got this set at slow. So I just put it as normal. Tool durability, tool binding speed, I leave these normal. If you want to make it easier, you can increase the mining speed, but I think for a more realistic gameplay, I just leave these at 100. ProPick node search radius. ProPick is something that helps you discover where ores are underneath the surface, and I will set this at 8 blocks. This is really important to reduce the grind, and it is still fairly grindy to search for ores. So having the ability to use the ProPick is rather important. If this makes no sense to you right now, that's okay. Set it to 8 blocks. Remember, not only is this a setting for your very first world that you're going to be playing in order to get to know the game and figure out how to play it at all, it's something that you can always set differently later. Global deposit spawn rate. This has to do with how the ores are distributed in the world. I just leave that as normal. Microblock chiseling. This has to do with how fancy you can make blocks in the world. I just set it to most. I like to leave the coordinates in the world map. You may disable these to make it even harder, but I really enjoy having a world map to look at. Temporal storms, these are fairly rough, but I go ahead and leave it at its default setting, which is every 10 to 20 days, and it increases capped at 100%. So that's kind of a normal range. I leave it how it's originally set. Temporal storm length, I leave that normal. Temporal stability, I leave that checked. Temporal risk visible. Temporal gear respawn uses infinite. And I also allow sleeping during temporal storms. Now, a temporal storm is an event, and it can happen anytime, day or night, that will put you in a state of having mobs continually spawn around you for a certain number of in-game hours. Now, this is an integral part of how the game works, so I like to leave these in as normal, but it's also easier if you are allowed to sleep through them. So I always make sure that I put allowed for sleeping during temporal storms, but the rest here I leave as normal. As far as world generation goes, I leave all of this the way it is set. Under surface copper deposit frequency, especially as a new player, it's set as rare now. I will move that up to uncommon. And then surface tin deposit frequency, I will move that from extremely rare to rare, and then leave snow melt and accumulation. Remember, if you've chosen a temperate climate, you will get snow. So if you want a happy medium and still get snow in your winter months, and remember, I don't think they're temperate, it's quite temperate, you get snow in most of the fall and most of the spring as well. So if you want to make that a little bit easier, you can disable snow melt and accumulation, because this will make it to where you have to dig the snow out in order to get under it. Mobs will be able to climb the snow and then possibly go over fences, so your fenced in animals could possibly climb on the snow and get out. So if you're prepared for that, you can leave this enabled. But if you don't want to deal with that at first, then you can disable this. Under the multiplayer, the only thing that will affect your single player world is possibly class exclusive recipes. This means that there will be recipes that you can only use if you are of that class. I would recommend disabling this at first. Although there aren't a lot of exclusive recipes, it's nice to be able to color your armor and not have to choose tailor. Now, you can go over here and click apply. So when you hover over standard here, you can see this list of recommendations of settings that I have. And I will make sure that a picture of this is available for download. Just take a look in the description. So from here, it looks like it didn't remember my settings there. We will click Create World. And of course, when you spawn in, you are able to set what your character looks like as well as your class. I recommend selecting Commoner as a single player in a brand new world as a new player, because you get no positive or negative traits, whereas every other class you'll have certain positives and certain negatives. I think it's easier to get used to the game and how it works by just choosing the Commoner. And then over here on Skin and Voice, you can customize the way you look. Another quick note on world configuration, there are a few things that are not in the customized world screen that we've been working in. The commands are listed in this website on the wiki. That's wiki.vintagestory.at, and the title of the page is World Configuration. You can find all of the commands if you're in a world and want to change something after you've created the world. All of the commands to change those are in here. The few that are not listed in the world screen are whether or not death messages will be displayed, whether or not wind affects player and creature movement, that's actually rather cool, Whether or not crops can die, I really wouldn't worry about that, even as a new player. And then the other 3 have to do with the auction house. So thank you for joining me in this world settings tutorial for Vintage Story. And I just wanted to say that this is not an ideal spawning world. Look at those 2 rifts right behind me. Now, if you back up too far, they will spawn baddies, so we want to leave those alone. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and until next time, play hard, die often, and leave a good-looking corpse. Oh my goodness, there's 3. There's 3 rifts. 4 rifts. There's another one right there. I'm only a little bit surrounded. Oh, 5? This, you know, it's a good thing I didn't start with mob spawning, because this could be really, really bad. Look at that temporal stability. That gear is going wacko. Just playing in the rifts.